Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, we are going to get a legal dose of insights here from some attorneys joining us, Mark Wendaur and Faith Miros of Offit Kurman. And they're going to talk to us a little bit about some of the legal side of logistics and warehousing and how that's evolving with some technologies coming into play and just general kind of knowledge around that. We've never had an attorney on the show before, so I'm interested to dig into this topic. And I heard them both speak at Home Delivery World last year in 2024 and was really interested in hearing some of the topics they were discussing and some of the challenges around some different legal jargon and things that are going on in that arena within our industry. So very excited to dive into this with them both. So Faith and Mark, welcome to the show. How are you both?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
Yeah, doing well. Great to see you again.
You too, definitely, and happy to get you on here and talk about this topic. I think it's a really interesting topic and one that we haven't quite explored on the podcast before. So very interested to hear all your thoughts and your insights on the legal side of things. So before we do that, Faith, why don't you kind of kick it off for us here? And you guys are with Offit Kurman, so tell us a little brief overview of Offit Kurman, who you serve, and what you're all about.
Absolutely. Offit Kurman is a national full service firm, and we have offices in 10 states and DC. We have about 300 attorneys here, and we represent business owners through the life cycle of their business. And our attorneys are able to collaborate across different practice areas to support those business clients throughout any of their legal challenges while operating their businesses.
Great, and very important to have, definitely for the life cycle of the business, and now all different parts of business there and industries, I think as well. So tell us a little bit about kind of how do you play into the warehousing and logistics side of business.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a principal attorney in our real estate practice group. So I represent owners, developers, and tenants relative to their real estate needs. So whether that's within leasing as it touches the warehouse industry and warehouse uses for those real properties, or it's the purchase or sale of warehouse or other industrial space. And I That's how I touch the industrial and warehouse market. And we also represent business owners who operate logistics companies within those spaces.
Gotcha. So Faith's got the real estate side of things, and Mark, what about you? What's your focus?
Yeah, so I focus primarily on the corporate side. I'm a
Hmm.
broad-based transactional attorney. I do some real estate work, I'll do some zoning work, but the bulk of my practice, I would say 80%, is focused on the actual contract that is driving the relationship for the client, whether that client is a shipping fulfillment center and they're having agreements with their customers, whether it's a freight forwarding company, really anything that touches on a contract. I sit in that outside general counsel role to help them ensure that their business is running smoothly.
Gotcha. So both definitely in integral parts of moving businesses forward and making sure that businesses are protected, right, in the right way to be able to navigate relationships and transactions and things of that nature. So tell us a little bit, and I guess this question I'll open up to both of you. You can decide who wants to answer first. But what are some of the biggest typical legal challenges that we see in the warehouse industry and warehouse businesses or logistics businesses?
Mark, you want to jump in first, or you want me to take that one?
Um, why don't you take it from the leasing perspective?
Sure, absolutely.
Sure.
So, some of the biggest challenges we're seeing is finding proper industrial sites that
Mm,
permit the use that the business operator intends. And so there are potentially zoning issues involved that we assist clients in navigating. Another big challenge with the real estate is environmental compliance. So we are potentially we're conducting environmental assessments that potentially reveal contamination, and we're negotiating the remediation of that contamination, and hopefully doing so in a fashion that protects our clients' costs and they do not inherit any liability relative to that. We're often analyzing lease structures to make sure that our business operator tenants are not getting hit with an excessive burden in their repair and maintenance obligations. And we often see escalating rent and CAM charges that are tied to market volatility. So we like to make sure we're negotiating those all appropriately on the front end in order to assist our clients in being most profitable. There's often cost overruns and timeline slippage with construction build outs as well. So we'll build in buffers there and protections also. And getting us involved early on to do that and be able to identify those challenges, while it might be a cost up front, it's usually it's usually saving a lot in the long run, and it's assisting them in being more profitable in their operations.
Interesting, interesting. And so you mentioned about the proper zoning there, and I'm curious around that because I see, it seems like there's areas that suddenly become like, industrial warehouse type building hotbeds almost, right? Like I'm here in, South Jersey here, Burlington County area, and this has certainly been in the last few years one that's like been expanding and exploding like that, where farms are now becoming warehouse farms, I guess, almost in in a sense, the way they're popping up. But is that, as people find like these sweet spots where distribution centers or warehouses want to be located, whether it's because there's great transportation accessibility or it's good access to population density, like how do you see townships embracing that or maybe not embracing that from a zoning perspective? And does that allow it to become easier to get zoning changes, or is there more resistance there?
Well, I think that's a really big question, and
Sure.
particularly with some of the federal regulations that have recently been put into place or are contemplated.
Mm.
So there's a lot in that question, but I think what stands out to me is that there's there's a constant adjustment in the market, and I think we're
Mm.
in that kind of an adjustment phase right now. I'd call it a transition. I think
Okay.
things are recalibrating after the the race to build more warehouse space during COVID. And now there aren't enough tenants taking up that space. And so that
Yeah.
market has slowed. And then couple that with the one big beautiful bill, which incentivizes multifamily developments, and there's also the potential for another act that hasn't yet passed, but it's gone through committee, the Road to Housing Act, that's also incentivizing multifamily. And so there's the potential to actually see warehouse conversions. So I think that's something that might impact industrial real estate and warehousing. So these acts are having a federal influence on local zoning. And there are also tax incentives tied to them. And so there's this incentive to potentially convert space. And while that might sound like a decrease in opportunity for warehouse space, I also know many companies that maintain warehouse portfolios, and this opens opportunity for them to shift assets or even offload some assets for profit because of this shift in zoning. But that being said, there's also opportunity with infrastructure around transit hubs and the ports being being improved, and that's potentially also going to bring more more of these logistics operations, especially locally in New Jersey, and increase opportunity for those businesses locally. So there's two heads to that coin, but I think there's opportunity there for everyone if they analyze appropriately and understand the different elements at stake.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And that's pretty interesting to hear kind of that ripple effect that would come down from that bill and these potential acts as well. And I have to ask you, you mentioned converting like a distribution center to multi family type of residential. Is that in a zoning sense converting, or are you seeing people take like warehouse spaces and turning them somehow
There
into
are
residential?
currently zoning regulations being contemplated to allow for expanded uses or change of uses within that area. So right now,
Interesting.
Midtown South, for example, in Manhattan, this is a big topic right now that's being spoken about because that's an industrial area of Manhattan that's
Hmm.
potentially going to be rezoned for multifamily development.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, yeah. I think it's really interesting to hear that, and you had a great point there, which I've heard from a couple of like brokers that I've talked to, where there there was this explosion of development, and now the tenants are just not there to fill those spots, and what do they do with the space, right? Or even like larger tenants that have taken long lease on a large facility. What are they doing? Because now they're not able to fill it up with inventory the way they thought they were going to be able to do. So really interesting there. And so Mark, what about from your perspective? What are some of the biggest legal challenges you're seeing out there in the industry?
Yeah. So, you know, one of the interesting things Faith touched on, so we built all these warehouses speculatively, thinking that we're
Mm-hmm.
going to be filled. If you look at, so okay, this construction's going on. What happened before that? So usually someone, formed an entity, purchased a property, obtained financing. All of that purchase and the forming of the entity usually involves a number of people, investors. So you have these governance documents that, say, okay, we're investing this much money. These are our preferred rights in the event this sells, in the event this starts generating cash flow. And then when you have these warehouses that maybe it was not as profitable as they were hoping for. Well, now you have these other conflicting interests before it even gets to, what's going on at the zoning level. You have someone saying, hey, I want my investment back out of this. What are their terms under those operating agreements or governance documents that allow them to pull out, to force a sale? What type of investor rights might they have? Um, the same, that same line, okay, they were going to construct this as a warehouse. They obtained financing on that. That's not being profitable. Now they're going to shift and do something different with it. What are the financing obligations they have in their loan documents? So there's a ton of contract driven decisions that have to go into basically, you know, this entire life cycle of the warehouse. And then, once you get inside the building, so you have all these other, okay, you do have some, right now, you did manage to fill the warehouse with some customers. The big thing we're seeing now, though, is, hey, maybe folks are slow to pay. Maybe they aren't paying. Maybe their merchandise isn't selling, so now they've stepped back from marketing it, and their business is going south. We had a client a little while ago. It's almost a sign of the times. They had pallets and pallets of personal protective equipment, face masks, gloves.
Yeah.
That stuff was a hot commodity. Now
Super
it just,
hot. Yeah.
it just is not moving like it was. So hey, these, you have companies like that who aren't paying their shipping bills. They aren't paying their warehousing fees. And it comes down to, okay, well, what rights and remedies do I have? So everyone's looking at their agreements now. Okay, can I assert a lien on this? If you do that, you have to see who else might have a claim to that property. Can you force the sale of it? What exactly can you do with it? Now that it's sitting in your warehouse, taking up space, now that they haven't paid their shipping and logistics bills. Um, so, really everything is coming down to a point you made earlier, Kevin, we're mitigating the risk.
Mm.
What steps were taken in the beginning to do that? So really everything is contract driven. What steps did you take? What other issues are out there? We see, you know, same thing. Okay, you have a warehouse. You've installed. Not everyone is, shipping T-shirts or board games or,
Mm.
consumer packaged goods. Some folks are shipping industrial machinery. So to do that, they had to install, crane lift onto the ceiling of their warehouse to move that around. Now, some individuals aren't paying there, or maybe the tariffs are kicking in, or pricing is changing. Everything. What was included in those agreements to help shift that risk and these changes, and that's really what we're getting into. Hey, what happens if this is held up because someone didn't pay, their tariffs? It's held up. It's stuck at the port. We can't get it.
Mm.
Now there's a huge delay in the plan and the project. It's a lot of unfortunately issues like that. There's delays, non-payments, and just mitigating the risk right now.
Mm. Interesting, interesting. And it sounds like, some of that may happen kind of like after the fact a little bit. So how do you kind of, when you go into the initial agreement of doing business together, I mean, how do you make sure that there's like protections in place for that?
Yeah, certainly. So, like you said, at the initial point, it's good to do it early
Mm-hmm.
before the contract is signed. Really, it's just building in the correct provisions. Allowing yourself to take a lien on that property, requiring disclosure of any other claims to that property when it comes in. Maybe you're doing credit checks on your customers. You're requiring partial payment. You're reviewing what the terms of payment are. We had a client a little while ago. As far as the service level agreement, they could not stop providing services until they provided 30 days notice. Well, okay, now you
Mm.
have a client that hasn't, or a customer who hasn't paid, their warehouse fees for 60 days. Now you have to send them a 30-day notice, and still keep providing services, even though, that they haven't been paying their bills. you know, I want to be able to cut them off day one if they're not doing it.
Yeah.
So it's really allowing different leverage points like that in the agreements.
Mm. Interesting, interesting. And then that example, and I'm curious about this because we do have like, a lot of 3PLs that listen to this podcast. Like, at that point where you said like, well, they haven't paid for 60 days, right? And then, we decide, okay, now we're going to give the notice, and now you're at like 90 days essentially, right? Not paid. Like at what point when you don't receive payment on time, like what do you advise, or generally like what's a good rule of thumb to like start to give that notice or start to take action against that?
It really depends on what is that what's that level of risk, right? So
Yeah.
is the unpaid bill 5,000? Is it 50,000? Is it
Mm.
150,000? The larger that exposure, the more leverage you're going to need to be able to have to stop that bad behavior. If it's and it goes even further than that, are you incurring costs on the other side? Let's say even if they've paid up, or made half payments, so you don't have a lot of risk on that. Are you then? Is it a cold storage? Do you have
Mm.
refrigeration fees attached to it?
Yeah.
All these issues like that. So really, it's a holistic view of what the risks are.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I can imagine there's kind of like there's a relationship balance there a little bit too, right? If
Yeah.
they're like 5 days pass and then you try to take action and like, hey, I just need it like 1 week to get it together or something like that. And now all of a sudden there's a little bit of a fracture there potentially. So very interesting. And now I'm curious too on the the contract side of things, like or just legal side of things in general. How is kind of AI coming into play when it comes to contracts? And I guess maybe one part of this question too is is it legit to put a contract in the chat GPT and have it like review it for you? Because I hear a lot of people say that, and I feel like I don't know if I fully trust that. So how is kind of AI coming into play now in the agreements and contracts and just legality and in general? Faith, you want to answer that one first?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a big way that it's coming into play is with the confidentiality provisions to make sure that you're not breaching any confidentiality by inadvertently placing confidential information into an AI tool. And then to match that, you have to expand your indemnification provisions to provide for indemnity against claims made for any such breach of confidentiality related to putting confidential information into AI tools, or otherwise when AI is not operating the way it should. I think from my perspective, also relative to real estate, a really important thing to mention about AI, because I know I mentioned a lot with respect to the current market, but AI driven data centers are in massive demand. So there are a lot of elements to contracts, whether it be a purchase agreement or a lease, that require additional due diligence relative to AI. So there's going to be utility capacity that you're looking into that you may not look into if it was not an AI intensive use. Um, there are there are going to be other due diligence matters that need to be taken into consideration relative to AI. And so that's an important piece. And a lot of that is done up front, but you want to allow for that extra due diligence specific to your use in the contract as well.
Interesting. And Mark, what are your thoughts around AI?
Yeah, I think the indemnification issue that Faith identified is a big one. So in these agreements, you have different representations and warranties. We represent that we are not using AI to serve this function, or we represent that we're using some form of competent product. Or really the other way, you'll have some of these AI companies saying, we don't know if it's going to work. We're giving this to you. It should work, but we are not responsible for anything.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's a balance in there where you need to be able to rely on you know whoever you're giving your sensitive information to. You need to be able to rely on them not using something that is going to provide third parties, other individuals, with access to your proprietary customer information, pricing schedules, all this information that you've worked hard to develop, or your customers' information. If they've given you a bunch of sensitive information regarding, who the end user is going to be, you're shipping these products to an individual. This stuff is flowing in through your system, which is using AI to help manage your shipping and packaging system. You need to make sure that whatever you're using it's not opening you up to exposure for a data leak. But then same side, talking to AI, some type of fraud. So there's ransomware is still huge in every
Yeah.
industry. But I continue. I just logged in to double check it. There's a case I've been following out of the state of Washington where this big shipping logistics company, suffered a ransomware attack, and one of their customers, who relied on them to ship out all their goods, because of that ransomware attack, nothing was leaving the warehouse. So this customer was pretty sure it was like a ski and snowboard apparel right around Christmas time, when everyone would be getting new
Oh
ski and
yeah.
snowboard apparel. So because of that ransomware attack, they suffered huge losses. Now all their inventory is no longer the new inventory, for
Yeah.
the next season cycle. So it's having big impacts, and all you can do is contract around it as best you can, because we're still, some of this, we're going to see a number of issues pop up for the next 3 or 4 years that no one really thought about. And all we can do is take our best guess, and stay up to date.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. And
would,
I think
oh,
that's,
sorry about that.
oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Faith.
No, if you don't mind, I just wanted to jump in and also offer another perspective. So I think we're looking at it from the perspective that might be the typical perspective for these logistics operators or these warehouse operators using robotics and other AI tools within the industrial space. But our contracts are also impacted before we even begin operating in that space, because AI tools are being used significantly to analyze deals and to locate the appropriate property at which to operate your business. So we're getting into contracts based upon due diligence that's being performed by AI and telling us what the appropriate rental rates are, how this location serves our business, and otherwise. And I think that's a really important point to make as well, how we're getting impacted when we're getting into that contract.
Yeah. And is that, I mean, that was kind of going to be my next question too. I mean, is that utilizing tools like that as like an operator, right? Like, just asking AI, like, what should I put in this agreement with my customer, or something like that? I mean, is that legitimate, or is that potentially risky trying to rely on that, or having like like uploading a contract to chat GPT or something and saying like, oh, just give me like the summary or the highlights or anything I should be concerned about? I mean, is that okay or safe to do at all?
Well, that's where I say I think attorneys should always have jobs, because
Yeah.
we're the ones who understand the reasonable terms and the market, and we can always fact check and we can assist our clients in minimizing risks. So, we all have used AI in whatever form. We've at least used it in its simplest form, asking a question. But it's important that if you don't have a base knowledge yourself to be able to assess whether that AI is delivering you correct information, you have to know where to go to find the right information and ensure that's what's being fed to you is accurate. So, there's still brokers, there are still attorneys, but AI is aggregating more information at once, but you still have those key professional service roles taking that information and analyzing it for you.
Hmm.
And one point on that, I think Faith says it, summed it up perfectly. And there was a Harvard Business Review article, and someone actually just forwarded it to me because they went to a class on AI use in the law. AI will not replace lawyers. Lawyers will be replaced by lawyers that use AI. So if you're not using AI as an attorney, you're probably you're not going to remain competitive. So there's tremendous value that can be had by using these tools. But like they said, if that's all you're relying on, as attorneys, when we use AI, we can see it making mistakes all the time.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's good advice. And yeah, I mean, I know for me, like, I want an attorney to look at it in agreement. I'm not trusting the AI yet for that full deep dive. But so very interesting there. And so obviously, you both see a lot of different kind of aspects of businesses and in the warehousing industry, from being on different deals and being involved, and seeing agreements, and I'm guessing probably some conflict sometimes too, as well, right? But as you look at that, I mean, what do you see is kind of potentially changing in the industry, and maybe where there's some potential opportunities due to like shifting legalities, or anything of that nature?
I, I'll just jump in and say that tenants, so the business operators that are not the owners of the industrial
Mm,
property, they have a lot of leverage right now.
mm,
So they are negotiating early termination clauses. They're negotiating reduced CAM charges being, common area maintenance expenses that are passed through to tenants. They're negotiating rent abatements, increased tenant improvement allowances, and shorter terms and with renewal options so that they can remain agile with market volatility and the economics that are at play. So I'm seeing that a lot. I work with a lot of tenants who are able to negotiate terms right now, and
mm.
that's significant in the industrial real estate world.
Yeah. So if you're looking to lease a space right now is like a pretty good time to do that. It sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the smart business owner is definitely revisiting the terms of their leases. Absolutely.
Hmm, interesting. And I'm curious, on that note, like, because the lease rates, right? It seems like there hasn't been much relief there, but I heard from a couple people saying that the owners, like the developers, or the landlords, right, are they're negotiating in a way that's allowing them to keep the same rate, but they're giving them like a couple months free, of rent, so that it doesn't like impact the market rate. Are you seeing that?
So rental rates have definitely softened. There is a
Mm,
bit of an uptick happening now, but they definitely softened from where we saw them, the last few years.
mm,
But that is true. It really depends on the parties involved, how they're approaching it. But there's a give and take always, and there has to be a solution that's mutually beneficial to the parties. So whether that's maintaining the rental rates where they are now and giving however many months free, or increasing how much money the landlord will contribute towards a tenant's build out, or other such perks. It can be in different forms. So that's absolutely the case, depending on who the party is. But in the alternative, I've had scenarios where if my client, as the business operator, doesn't mind incurring moving expenses and the delays or challenges involved with moving, and they have the opportunity to either to terminate their lease, or they're at the end of their term and they don't want to renew, they can use that as leverage to negotiate an amendment during their renewal term that increases lower rental rates. And I've seen that happen where they've basically said,
mm,
I can go elsewhere for this price. And I'm fine with doing that. But I'd be happy to stay if we can come to some sort of agreed upon amendment to the rental terms for me to remain. And oftentimes a landlord rather keep a tenant they know than have
yeah.
to search for a new one.
Mm, interesting. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like the tenant kind of has some advantage right now, a little bit, and
Absolutely.
interesting. And what about from your side, Mark? Are you seeing any potential opportunities out there for people?
Yeah, I think I think along the same lines as what Faith is saying. If you're identify what your problem points are right now, that you're experiencing, and go to your contract, see what your contract actually says and see if there's something, where you can, you know, go to your customer and say, hey, we need better payment terms. You're falling behind. Or, even if you have, Faith raised the prospect of someone saying, hey, we need to amend the lease. Take a look and see if it's been a good customer. If they haven't, say, look, maybe we need to part ways. Maybe there is someone better for you. You know, we have AI, we have access to all this data now, harness it, see where your problem and pain points are, and then see what you can do. Because, all contracts are negotiable. It just depends on, what the facts are and the circumstances are when you're negotiating them. So if you're in a position where, you know, you have strength over your vendors, you have strength over your customers, or, you have increased risk or you're suffering from increased costs somewhere, see what you can do, see what, we're not saying be malicious about it, but you can make sure that your business makes sense. You don't have to suffer and start, if your investors are saying, hey, this investment was a bad deal, we need out of this, look and see where you might be able to change that perspective from and say, hey, look, that was the case. Things are changing now because X, Y, and Z. We've done this with these customers, or we've reduced our costs on this vendor side. So that's really where the opportunities are. We have a changing landscape. Try to identify exactly what has changed and where you might be able to benefit from that change.
Yeah, very very great tips there, definitely, and I love that you said leverage the data and AI to make sure you're understanding exactly like kind of what's actually going on and what's the best move forward, right, and make some critical decisions there. So really interesting to talk to you both here and kind of tap into your legal and attorney knowledge here to help our listeners make sure they don't make a misstep in that area. So really appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your insights and thoughts with us. If people are looking for some legal help or want to get in touch with you to talk a little more, what's the best way to do that and get more information?
Yeah, best way, Kevin, we're happy to provide our contact info for the show notes. We're both on LinkedIn, email, call, LinkedIn message, really whatever works convenient for, the individual.
All right, fantastic. And we'll definitely put that information at thenewwarehouse.com and in the show notes as well. So Faith and Mark, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for having us.
Yeah, been a pleasure. Great seeing you again.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.